everyone, my name is Sophie Maes. I'm a partner at Claes& Engels. Every month I have a little chat with one of our members, and I'm very happy to have today with me Hannah. Hannah is based in the UK with our UK member firm, Lewis Silken. So, Hannah, tell me, what do you want to share with us?
So today I'd love to talk about remote working overseas policies. And what I mean by that is focusing on policies where they enable employees to go for short-term remote working rather than things like secondments or permanent relocations. I'd like to talk about the types of policies and what these could look like, and often misconceptions that employers have about these type of policies.
And why is it important? Why should we know that?
And it's obviously very helpful if employers have a policy in place, because what it means is the employees are then aware of the risks. So you hopefully prevent the scenario where employers find out way after the employee has been living in a country that they've been living there and have caused the company some few tricky issues to deal with.
Okay, so I need to have a policy. So that's what you're saying. So what do I start? What do I have to think?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, when a client comes to talk to me about a policy, I'm already thrilled, because companies without policies often fall into a tricky situation where they have an employee that they discover has been working overseas. And it's much easier to deal with that scenario when you've already told an employee that they can't go overseas, because it's much easier to follow a disciplinary process in that kind of context. But yeah, when I'm talking to clients about first thinking about these type of policies, I always discuss with them the purpose. Why are they bringing in this policy? Because the purpose of it will dramatically change the shape of the type of policy that they introduce. So, for example, you get some companies who actually just want to completely eliminate the risk of remote working. And basically what the policy says is we don't permit it. And then you have the other extreme, which is a company who wants to bring in a type of policy to use it as a benefit, like a talent attraction retention tool. And that is a completely different type of policy. What that's trying to do is enable employees to be able to work in different countries by having certain rules in the policy. So, for example, you can work for a week or two in Spain or another country. But that's quite an undertaking for companies to establish that type of policy, because you need to go out to all of the different countries and work out what the consequences are of having employees work in that country for a short period of time, and then work out whether it is actually viable. Sometimes it won't be. And then you try and establish rules within the policy to effectively have a kind of pre-approved number of countries that they can work from for so many weeks. The other one is a kind of middle ground between those two, and is probably the more common scenario that we see employers wanting to take, which is wanting to have a policy that enables employees to go overseas if there's a kind of compelling or good reason for them to be going over there. So, you know, we're not talking about employees just wanting to go and work from a sunny location and sip cocktails on the beach. More scenarios where, like, unfortunately, they might have a unwell family member and they want to go and care for them, and a company really wants to support that process. So in those kind of scenarios, you would have a policy where it would set out the different risks, and then actually inform employees that it's a very fact-specific type of exercise that they'll need to go through, and they'll consider the particular employee in the country that they're traveling in. And then the legal advice will come afterwards when you're considering that particular scenario. So there's a lot, as you can see, there's a lot of different ways of approaching it, and a lot of different ways that these policies can kind of be shaped. But unfortunately, unless you're going for the absolute no remote working allowed, it's not a cheap and easy process. Both of the other options require quite a lot of legal input, and if companies aren't going through that process, then they are exposing themselves to quite significant risks.
Okay, so interesting. But there was one other thing that triggered my attention, because in the beginning you were referring to misconceptions.
Yes.
So If you can explain that a bit more. That
Yes,
would help.
the common misconceptions that we get. So when employers come to us, they often say, "Oh, I've heard that this company's doing X, Y, and Z. Can we just let our employees like work from anywhere for 2 weeks?" No, unfortunately, you can't. Yeah, I think maybe this misconception of like just a few weeks being okay in a different country might have come from the pandemic. During that time, immigration rules were kind of a lot more relaxed for employees working remotely, and now we're actually seeing it go the other way. Countries are really kind of cracking down on remote working. I think employers need to always remember that employees need the right to work in a country, and I think sometimes companies think that the business exemptions for visas are often something that can apply to remote working, and that's often not the case. When they're remote working, they're not going for a meeting. It's a completely different scenario. So yeah, it's really something that employers need to think about. Another one of the misconceptions is a blanket approach to having a policy. So you can't just say, and this kind of links back to the 2 weeks idea, you can't just say, oh, we're going to allow 1 week working for everywhere. Each country has, unfortunately, its own set of rules, and each one needs to be considered. The other kind of looking at it from a blanket approach scenario is employers thinking that they can treat all employees the same. You'd think so, but actually there's certain employees in companies that create a larger risk, and that's usually for corporate tax purposes. So generally employees who are kind of negotiating or signing contracts on behalf of their company can create permanent establishment risks in the country that they're working remotely from. And that really can have quite significant consequences for companies, because they could end up paying corporate tax on their business, for example, in the UK, in a completely different country abroad. The final thing that I think is a real misconception of employers is thinking that they can shift all of the liability on employees. So, okay, we know all about the risks, but actually, that's fine. We'll just make it the employee's problem. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work. Often there are specific employer obligations in countries, not just employee obligations, like in relation to tax withholding and social security withholding. And often what will happen is if there are breaches, the authorities will come after the employer rather than the employee. So unfortunately for the people watching thinking, we'll just get around it and we'll put it on the employee, that doesn't always work too well. So yeah, a few things for companies to think about.
Okay, but thank you very much for sharing all this. This was extremely interesting. So thank you very much. So thank you also for listening.
Thank you for having me.